A cataclysmic event over 2.5 million years ago changed the face of human history. It transformed our world forever and plunged us into a frozen planet.
This is the story of the Ice Age, where mega beasts roam and early humans face a daily desperate battle for survival.
It's easy to imagine just what the Ice Age might have looked like. It's harsh, inhospitable, and it's a challenging environment. What caused the Ice Age in the first place? What sort of creatures lived in a world that looked like this most of the time? And the biggest question of all, could it ever happen again?
It's an environment devastating and deadly to so many. But some creatures adapted to survive and even thrive in this harsh new world.
Michaela Strachan and I will be stepping back in time to reveal how humans managed to survive this frozen world and set our earliest ancestors on the path to becoming modern humans. I'm Steve Backshall.
Welcome to the epic story of the Ice Age.
In the beginning, before humans even existed, a different type of creature dominated our planet.
That all changes 66 million years ago. An asteroid at least 6 miles wide thunders into our planet. It's an extinction-level event, and the majority of large animals are wiped out.
But some creatures survive the apocalypse. The Earth slowly heals. And no longer in the shadow of the dinosaurs, new animals emerge. But life starts small. When our planet becomes a frozen world,
We enter the Great Ice Age. And the mega beasts return, but not as we've ever seen them before.
deep in the sub-zero heart of the Arctic Circle, Michaela is in Svalbard to unravel what makes an ice age. 1,600 miles north of the UK, this Norwegian archipelago is at the top of the world. Svalbard is home to just 2,600 people, most of whom live in Longyearbyen, the most northerly town on the planet, surviving at the very edge of the world within a harsh landscape where the sun never rises in winter and temperatures can be as low as minus 30 degrees Celsius.
There's a real harsh beauty about this place, and surrounded by all this snow and ice, it's easy to imagine just what the Ice Age might have looked like. It's inhospitable and a challenging environment. We think of the Ice Age as unmoving, a frozen, endless winter. But in fact, it was a period of dynamic change with rapid climatic shifts.
It's hard to imagine anyone actually living out here, so I'm hoping Dr. Mark Furs can help me unpack what the Ice Age was like. Mark's one of the world's foremost experts on glaciers and has been studying the Ice Age for decades.
So, Mark, what defines an Ice Age then?
So an ice age really is having ice centred on the poles that can expand out as the planet cools and then retreat back as the planet warms.
What most people don't realise is that we're still in an Ice Age because we have permanent ice at the poles.
That's right.
Let's sort of wind back a bit, because there's been more than one ice age, hasn't there? There's been, what, 5 ice ages?
Yes, the most recent ice age is what we call the Quaternary time period. And that starts at about 2.6 million years ago. And that can be quite hard to understand in terms of human time frame.
It was during the Quaternary period that we saw the rise of Ice Age megabeasts. But scientists now know that over the course of the Earth's 4.5 billion year history, there have been 5 major ice ages. But how do we know there were ice ages all these millions of years ago?
The concept of ice ages is relatively recent, isn't it?
That's right. Prior to the mid-1800s, there was the biblical notion that the Earth was only about 7,000 years old, and there wasn't time for these changes in climate to really take place.
For hundreds of years, scientists believe biblical flooding from the time of Noah's Ark created many of the planet's geological features, like the huge U-shaped valleys found in places like Yosemite in America, Vatnajökull in Iceland, and the Snowdonia National Park in Wales. It wasn't until the 1800s that the idea the planet had been subject to ice ages that shaped our planet took hold. But the cause of ice ages remained a mystery. This enigma wasn't solved until the 1920s, when a geophysicist came out with a bold theory.
Milutin Milankovic, a Serbian mathematician, came up with the expansion and contraction of the ice sheets. And that's really about the relationship of the Earth going around the sun.
Milankovic worked out that every 100,000 years, the Earth's orbit changes and becomes more elliptical, so our planet moves further away from the sun, allowing the ice sheets to expand. When our orbit returned to normal and became more circular, the planet warmed up and the ice sheets retreated.
It blows my mind that someone can work that out before we've got satellites.
And before we have computers or calculators, really just with a pencil and paper back in the 1920s. It's an incredible work of mathematics to figure this out.
Milankovic's discovery of these ice age cycles was so ahead of its time that it took science almost 50 years to catch up and truly understand the mysteries of the ice age. Scientists realized that during the ice age, temperatures fluctuated in cycles every 100,000 years.
All ice ages aren't just one cold event. They're typically marked by multiple glaciations, when the ice extends from the poles southward, and then shorter warm interglacial periods, these warm periods that we find ourselves in today.
It's during the hotter interglacial periods that new kinds of creatures evolved. But it was the beasts that could adapt to the merciless temperatures of the Ice Age that survived.
I'm in southwest England, at the Mendip Hills near Bristol. It's right here that some of the titans of the Ice Age lived.
If an Ice Age human was to beam forward in time to now, they'd find an unrecognizable landscape. Theirs was wild, brutal, hostile, and sometimes barren. Ours has been tamed by human hands, by agriculture and housing. There are still, though, hidden corners where you can peer back through time to what Ice Age Britain would have been like.
The limestone hills here are riven with caves, gorges and gullies, perfect places for the preservation of Ice Age skeletons.
I've spent my adult life tracking and filming the most impressive creatures we have around today, but I've always been intrigued by the animals of the Ice Age. They had to be robust and rugged to put up with the most savage conditions that the Ice Age world could throw at them. They survived for hundreds of thousands of years, and then they had to move on, or some went extinct, in ways that we're only now beginning to understand.
One person that understands the creatures of the Ice Age better than most is world-leading archaeologist, Professor Danielle Shreve. She's uncovered the remains of Ice Age creatures found here and across the UK. But during the Ice Age, this area would have looked very different.
So we're in the midst of verdant green English countryside. But how would right here have looked during the peak of the last ice age?
So first of all, it would have looked very different in terms of no woodland behind you. It would have been a really bleak and barren landscape, pretty savage conditions. It would have been almost intolerable here.
But what about the rest of the nation as it is now?
That kind of environment pretty much covered the whole of this part of England, extending up into the Midlands, and it's only when you get further to the north that you start to get the large ice sheets building up.
During the Ice Age, not only was a large part of Britain covered in ice, but it wasn't even an island. Because more of the water in the ocean was locked up in ice sheets, the sea level was at times 130 metres lower, and Britain was connected to Europe.
If we go back to the middle part of the last ice age, this was an extinct ecosystem known as the Mammoth Steppe. It ranges all the way from here in southwest England into Asia. It was super rich in plant diversity and animal diversity.
The Mammoth Steppe was the stomping ground for one of the masters of the Ice Age, the woolly mammoth. Closely related to modern elephants, they spread out of Africa into the colder, harsher landscapes of the Northern Hemisphere about 3 million years ago. The woolly mammoth evolved to endure harsher temperatures and used the Mammoth Steppe as grazing lands, typically roaming thousands of miles in their lifetime as they hunted out new feeding lands. These wandering herds of mammoth were led by a dominant female known as the matriarch. Standing nearly 3.5 meters tall and weighing about 6 tons, this majestic creature would have led groups of up to 15 individuals along the 8,000 miles of the Mammoth Steppe. It would take the matriarch almost half a year to guide the herd across the Mammoth Steppe from Siberia all the way to the southwest of England. But how do we know for sure that these incredible creatures really lived right here in the UK? I'm hoping Danielle has the bones to prove it. Cheddar Gorge is an Ice Age graveyard. And archaeologist Danielle Shreve will reveal what's been found deep below the ground.
We've got some pretty unusual things, and it's important to remember that these are animals that were living right here, and they are things that we don't find living in Britain anymore.
This is one that I recognise because you can't miss it. That's a mammoth tooth. It's very, very similar to a modern elephant tooth.
Mammoths go through a set of 6 teeth in their lifetime. Once these teeth wear away, they're replaced by the next one, a bigger one in the system. So the teeth feed from the back like a conveyor belt.
These giant teeth allowed the matriarch to eat a gargantuan 200 kilos of plant matter daily. She may have spent as long as 20 hours each day foraging for fresh grass and flowering herbs like clover. But Danielle has the remains of other creatures the mammoth would have encountered in Siberia. And here's an animal I know firsthand, an Ice Age creature that's still found today in the sub-zero temperatures of the Arctic, but used to be a UK resident.
Okay, so that one I recognise, that's fox, right?
It is a fox, but not the red fox that we have in Britain today. This is actually an Arctic fox.
Arctic fox is the ultimate cold-adapted animal, isn't it? It's smaller than our red fox, smaller ears. It has that great big tail that it can use to wrap round itself almost like a comfort blanket. This is an animal that doesn't even start shivering until it's -30, -40. In some ways, it is the Arctic specialist.
Certainly is. They have excellent thermal insulation.
The Arctic fox died out in the UK when temperatures started to rise about 12,000 years ago. However, Danielle has the remains of some fearsome predators that used Ice Age Somerset as their hunting ground.
We've got our spotted hyena, the same species that we find in Africa today. They were much more widespread in the past. They were all over Europe. And you can see these are animals that are perfectly adapted to bone crushing and crunching.
Spotted hyenas would have made the plains of Ice Age Britain a dangerous place to be. Hunting in packs, these monsters would have been up to 20% bigger than their modern descendants, with each individual almost the size of a lion. Their jaws would have been stronger than any land predator today, biting with enough force to crush the skulls of their herbivore prey.
Do we have any signs on these bones of them being fed on by predators?
Yes, definitely. And if you think about the way that carnivores hunt today, they will go after the more vulnerable individuals. So they might go after elderly and sick animals, but predominantly they'll be hunting the younger ones. We've got a specimen over here where you can see the power of those hyena jaws. So this is actually part of a red deer. It's part of the thigh bone. And if I just turn it round, you can hopefully see that there are huge puncture marks, pits that are left behind by the powerful canine teeth of the hyena.
This bone really tells a story. This gives me an image of a massive hyena crunching through the bones of an animal that's long since passed. And to imagine that happening right here puts the hairs up on the back of my neck.
The UK is a hotbed of Ice Age treasures, the most famous of which is on the Norfolk coast, where the biggest species of mammoth to ever exist was uncovered. So what is it about this stretch of coastline, known as the Deep History Coast, that's made it one of the biggest Ice Age archaeological parks in the world? I'm joining Norfolk Museum curator Dr. David Waterhouse, who believes the answers lie in Norfolk's unique cliffs.
David, this part of the Norfolk coast is a hot spot for finding fossils.
Yeah.
Why is it so good?
It's really luck more than anything, but it just so happens that these cliffs are really soft. This isn't rock.
So this is all sediment from the Ice Age?
Yeah, this was all dumped here, big glacier, just dumped all this material here.
And all this is eroded, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the fastest eroding coastline in Europe. Whole roads and streets have actually fallen into the sea. The silver lining, I suppose, is this amazing geology gives up its treasures.
What's the best thing that you found?
I found bits of hippo just along the coast here, so what you'd associate with Africa was living here nearly 1 million years ago.
I love the thought that we had hippos here once.
Yeah, hippos
amazing.
were native to Norfolk.
But it wasn't just hippos living here tens of thousands of years ago. The ancient sediment found in these cliffs preserved one of Britain's most important Ice Age finds.
Probably the best thing that's been found just along the coast here is something called the West Runton mammoth that was uncovered in the 1990s. The largest and oldest mammoth ever found in Britain was from right here in Norfolk.
And that was found just by amateur beachcombers, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Imagine finding that. How did they come across it?
Well, it was December. The storms had scoured out some of this soft sediment, and in it was a giant pelvis from a mammoth, probably about twice the size of an African elephant that we'd get today.
Imagine walking your dog along this beach and suddenly you come across the pelvis of a mammoth in the cliff.
Digging up the West Runton mammoth was too great a task for trailblazing amateur archaeologists. This mammoth specimen is so huge that it took 5 years to fully excavate it. It's an example of the biggest species of the elephant family to ever live, what's known as a steppe mammoth. So it's unsurprising to hear that the West Runton mammoth would have been over 4 meters tall and weighed more than 10 tons, almost as tall and heavy as a double-decker bus. So how did mammoths differ from their modern elephant relatives? Even though mammoths share over 99% of their genes with Asian elephants, there are a number of important differences. Mammoths had 4 inches of fat under their skin to keep them warm, so had larger, rounder bodies and smaller ears and tails. All of this means they had a higher mass-to-surface area ratio, therefore lost less heat through their skin. Despite this mammoth being perfectly adapted to its environment, its life was tragically cut short.
Do you know how this particular mammoth died?
Well, in fact, it's quite a sad story for that individual. He was an adult male in his prime. We know that from the pelvis and also these giant tusks that he had. About 39, 40 years old. But what happened was he dislocated his right knee. So he would have got stuck in the mud. and unfortunately that's where he died. So that's why we've got nearly the whole skeleton. Elsewhere along the coast you just find little bits and bobs of things like mammoth.
The eroding cliffs of Norfolk revealed this lone mammoth's final resting place. But this is nothing compared to a discovery Professor Danielle Shreve and her team made last year. They hit international news after they unearthed signs of another Ice Age titan that stalked our shores. Their discovery in the summer of 2021 sent shockwaves around the world. In a small cave in Plymouth, Danielle's identified the skeletal remains of a fearsome Ice Age megabeast that went extinct about 14,000 years ago. Up to now, she's kept the results a secret, but now she's ready to share her findings.
Well, this is all pretty intriguing. Kind of feel like I've been beamed back into some Ice Age CSI lab.
It must feel something like that, seeing all the bones and teeth laid out in front of you.
Yeah. Tell me a bit about the cave and where they were found.
So the cave itself was an extraordinary find. It was made during excavations for a new housing development just to the east of Plymouth. The diggers cut into the top of this cave system, which had remained completely unexposed for thousands of years. And inside, there are all these amazing finds.
It's not the kind of thing that you expect to find in a housing development on the edge of Plymouth.
The Ice Age treasures within this cave have all been dated to around 45,000 years ago. The discoveries include the jaw of a baby hyena, the entire skeleton of a lone wolf, the bones of herbivores like horse, and even an adolescent mammoth.
In front of you is one of the real big mega herbivores, and these are remains of a woolly rhinoceros.
Are they? That is super, super impressive.
It's believed that the woolly rhino first appeared in the UK 300,000 years ago. Much like the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhino survived the bitter Ice Age conditions thanks to its warm, shaggy coat. This was made from 2 layers of hair, a short undercoat and a longer layer on top, which are known as guard hairs. Whatever could have happened to this 2-metre tall, 3-ton behemoth for him to meet his end in this cave?
If the mammoth is the best known animal of the Ice Age, this is probably the most underrated, isn't it? The woolly rhino.
Yes, it's the unsung hero of the Ice Age. This is actually my favourite species of all the Ice Age beasts. Really impressive animal.
My first idea is, could this pure and simple have been a place where these animals were living?
Rhinos wouldn't naturally be living in the caves. Certainly when we look at the carnivores, things like the young hyena, the hyena cub, this is an animal that could well have been denning in part of the cave system.
Where there's a baby hyena, there must be a mother. I've already seen what they do to their prey's bones, and I know they can work as a pack to take down a horse with ease. But could they really have killed our woolly rhino?
Looking at something like the woolly rhino skull, fully formed, that's going to be as heavy as a fridge freezer, isn't it? So chances of a wolf or a hyena picking that up and taking it into the cave, slim.
Very unlikely, because once these really large mega herbivores, the woolly rhino and the woolly mammoth, get to adulthood, they're pretty much unassailable.
The defensive arsenal of a woolly rhino would have made it a formidable quarry for any predator. They had 2 horns on their head, with the furthest forward resembling a metre-long weapon. These horns would not have been made from bone, but from keratin, the same material our hair and nails are made from. This horn was used for defense, as well as removing snow as they foraged for grass in the sub-zero temperatures of the Ice Age winter. But looking closely at the bones of the woolly rhino and the other herbivores, Danielle's realised there's something missing.
It doesn't have any of those telltale gouge marks that we saw on the bones from Cheddar Gorge, does it?
No, the lack of gnawing is absolutely key, because hyenas have got such powerful jaws and they will crunch away at the ends of the bones until they leave almost nothing, a bit like a napkin ring of bone. And in fact, actually, when we look at these bones, there's no evidence for carnivore gnawing at all.
So if carnivores didn't kill these creatures, let's examine another victim. One of the most intelligent and nimble Ice Age predators, the grey wolf. Wolves are one of the great survivors of the Ice Age and were able to adapt their diet to eat different prey as the mega herbivores died out. And looking at this well-preserved skeleton, I have another theory.
I've been in cave systems in the past where animals have been swept in by water, by flooding. Is there a possibility that they were washed in, maybe during a flash flood?
There are a number of sites where there have been certainly evidence of catastrophe, what we call catastrophic death assemblage, where it's quite clear that whole herds have been washed away in a flash flood.
But has Danielle found any evidence that the wolf or the other animals died a watery death?
When you tend to get sort of water washing bones along, you tend to see evidence on the bones themselves for rounding and abrasion caused by tumbling along in a water body. And in fact, these are very well preserved. The edges are pristine, and certainly fragile things like that wolf's skull could not have been tumbled along. So that in itself would suggest that actually it's died through another means rather than through a flood bringing it in.
The plot thickens. I'm now genuinely intrigued. I kind of feel like I'm next to Sherlock Holmes. Maybe I'm your Watson.
I have one more idea about why these creatures all died right in this cave. And Michaela's on the track of the one creature missing from this collection of ancient bones, the ultimate apex predator of the Ice Age, the sabre-toothed cat. I'm in the middle of an Ice Age murder mystery. So far, we've worked out that these animals weren't eaten by hyenas or drowned in the cave. What I can't figure out is what this massive mammoth was doing there. Why did this majestic beast walk alone into this cave and never come out?
What can you tell me about the mammoth that this came from?
So this particular tusk is quite slender and quite small. So it's from a juvenile animal. And you can see it's made up of ivory, but it's got almost like an onion peel texture to it, where you can see those rings of enamel that have built up around a central core, and the gentle curve on it that is typical of mammoth tusks.
Mammoth tusks grew in cone-shaped layers. They were often found worn on the underside. It's thought mammoths used them for clearing away snow so they could feed on the grass beneath. But their tusks were also weapons of war. It's thought that once a year, bull mammoths entered a state called must, where their thoughts turned to mating and their testosterone levels skyrocketed to 10 times their normal levels. During this phase, if two bull mammoths met, they would fight over mating rights for the females in the herd, using their tusks to push, gouge, and stab their rival. If a young mammoth lost this battle, they could be pushed out of the herd by the matriarch and made to fend for themselves. Could this have been what happened to our adolescent mammoth?
When the young males get to an age where they're able to move away from the security of that herd, they will often get into difficulties, either on their own or in small bachelor groups.
So, typical young blokes getting themselves in trouble.
It looks like it, doesn't it?
So, the next thing that occurs to me is it possible that this cave was almost like a natural pitfall trap, and that the bigger animals may have just fallen in?
I think that's the preferred interpretation at the moment. Lots of animals in the natural world come to a sticky end by accident. And in fact, we do have precedent for elsewhere. Something like the wolf skeleton might represent an individual that came in, attracted by carcasses, and then was unable to get out again.
So I guess what we're looking at is death by misadventure.
I would say so. Having eliminated all the other likely possibilities, I think this is a place of accidental death, a place where these animals came in and met their doom.
But there's one iconic Ice Age predator missing from the Plymouth Cave, a creature found in the Americas during the Ice Age. Megafauna specialist Dr. Stephen Zhang is the man to reveal the era's greatest carnivore.
Stephen, we're talking about the massive vegetarians, but of course there were huge carnivores as well, the sabre-toothed cats.
Here we have the Smilodon, nightmares of Ice Age megaherbivores. The North American saber-toothed cat.
Wow, look at that. Can I hold it?
Yes, you may. Just look at the fangs.
Look at the size of that. People in the past have called these saber-toothed tigers, but they're actually not tigers, are they?
You're absolutely spot on, Michaela. Saber-toothed cats belonged to a completely extinct lineage of the cat family that were only distantly related to the common ancestor of all living cats.
And how big was it?
The North American species would have been the size of a large Siberian tiger at around 260 to 300 kilos. The South American species, Smilodon populator, or the saber-toothed annihilator, was even larger, weighing over 400 kilos. That's the size of a grizzly bear.
I love that, the annihilator saber-tooth.
Exactly.
So talk me through how a saber-toothed cat would have hunted and what it would have hunted.
So the killing sequence of a Smilodon is it first wrestles and pins down a prey like a young bison or a young mammoth with its extremely powerful shoulders and forelimbs, and the vulnerable and vital underside of the neck area is exposed, where the saber-tooth employs an extremely exquisite precision-killing bite with those fabled sabers, and the prey dies from a combination of suffocation and massive blood loss.
Smilodon gets its name from the Greek for carving knife tooth, but while these famous fangs look terrifying, they have one major flaw. They're surprisingly brittle and might have broken if used to bite through smaller, bony prey.
A Smilodon would be rubbish at biting through a rabbit because the teeth would break upon contact with bones.
That makes me laugh, the thought of those being rubbish at killing a rabbit.
It beggars belief, but these were exceptional at killing bisons and mammoths and wild horses and ground sloths, but would be rubbish for killing a rabbit.
Sadly, this limitation was a key factor in Smilodon's decline. About 10,000 years ago, the mega herbivores it hunted began to die out, and Smilodon was unable to adapt its diet and hunt smaller prey. Its numbers dwindled until it became extinct.
But I want to know what caused the huge Ice Age herbivores like mammoths to die out. I've come to the Natural History Museum in Stockholm, Sweden, to get under the skin of the mammoth. I've seen their bones, but now I'm actually getting to see a mammoth in its entirety and find out why they went extinct.
I've been lucky enough to stand in the shadow of modern elephants this close, and the sense of enormous destructive potential is overwhelming.
However, there's only so much we can learn from looking at the bones of these creatures. I want to investigate their DNA, which will hopefully give me an answer to what happened to them. Professor Luva Dallin has a lifelong passion for the beasts of the Ice Age and is the world's #1 mammoth geneticist.
Luva, you have drawers and drawers and drawers full of Ice Age artifacts, but it seems like this is the one where all the big stuff is.
Yeah, this is where we have the really large mammoth remains.
This tusk here is just extraordinary.
You want to hold it?
Yeah,
you want
please.
to lift it up? Go on.
Whoa, that's heavy.
They are pretty heavy, yeah. And this is a small one.
That's extraordinary.
Very, very old.
So I really mustn't drop this.
Please don't.
That is quite something. I'm going to put it down very, very carefully. Now, much of your research is really cutting edge, despite the fact that we're going way back in time. you are delving into the DNA of these creatures.
The DNA is a really useful tool to understand prehistory. It is a bit like using a time machine. We can see when certain genes evolve, and we can see when the population size changes.
That's amazing. So you are uncovering the life and the history of possibly the most iconic creature of the Ice Age.
And it's an interesting species as well, because it was a keystone species in the ecosystem.
To study the mammoth's DNA, first we need to extract it from the tusk. And to do that, we need to get suited up to prevent contaminating the specimen.
So first of all, we need a piece of sterile tinfoil that we have prepared here. And drill.
Luva is drilling into an ancient mammoth tusk recovered from the permafrost of Siberia.
So that is pure mammoth magic dust.
Now it's your turn.
Okay.
And you grab the mammoth in the left hand and the drill in the right hand.
Okay.
What you need to do is to hold it like a pen. Yeah, exactly.
It's very good of you to be trusting me with this.
We'll see.
I never thought I'd be taking a sample from a mammoth that died thousands of years ago. It's unbelievable.
So those are the building blocks that make up the most iconic creature of the Ice Age.
What will the mammoth DNA reveal about how these majestic Ice Age titans were wiped out? And does it provide a way to resurrect this extinct species? In Sweden, I'm joining Professor Luva Dahlen, extracting ancient mammoth DNA, which can reveal how this mighty species became extinct.
This is more than enough to sequence the entire genome of a mammoth.
Wow.
A genome is all of the genetic information of an organism made up of DNA. In 2015, Luva and his team made a world-changing discovery. They were the first scientists to sequence the entire genome of the woolly mammoth.
I don't think I've ever seen a genome before.
Yeah?
What does it look like?
Well, I can show you on the computer what the mammoth genome looks like.
Yeah.
All right, so it's a bit like the Matrix.
So all of those A's, T's, C's and G's, those are the base pairs that make up
The mammoth genome, roughly 3 billion base pairs.
This genome is so detailed that if the average person were to type it out, it would take them 50 years. So why did the woolly mammoth die out? Researchers in Alaska have gained an amazing insight into the life of one male mammoth named Keek. By studying the genetic makeup of his tusks, they tracked his movements from 17,000 years ago, from when he was just a baby to a fully grown adult. During his lifetime, Keek's habitat was changing. Temperatures were increasing, his grazing lands were disappearing, and he found himself more and more surrounded by forest.
The temperatures go up, you get a much more wet environment, more precipitation, and so therefore the whole ecosystem changes from this kind of dry steppe into a more boggy, swampy kind of tundra that we have today, and that's not good for mammoths.
So it's likely to be a combination of lots of different factors and something that happened over a very long period of time.
As Keek became a juvenile, much like our mammoth who fell into the cave, he would have been encouraged to leave the herd at around the age of 10 and strike out on his own. In his quest for food, Keek walked nearly 43,000 miles in his lifetime. That's almost twice around the world. But evidence from his tusks showed that he died of malnutrition at the age of 28. Keek's sad tale is a stark lesson of the dangers of climate change that we and other species still face today. The mammoth steppe that was the Ice Age superhighway was disappearing. The mammoths were forced to hunt out new grazing lands to power their supersized 6-ton bodies. Fewer than 1,000 individuals trekked to one of the coldest and most desolate places in the world. Wrangel Island, in the far northeast of Siberia. This frozen rock was part of the mainland until the sea level rose as the world warmed up 10,000 years ago, and was likely the last safe haven for the species. It's amazing to think that this population survived until around 4,000 years ago, the same time humankind was building the pyramids in Egypt. So what has Luva discovered from the genome about these last few hundred Ice Age survivors?
What we see using genome sequencing is that inbreeding goes from very low levels to very high levels very quickly. So clearly the last surviving population of woolly mammoths was highly inbred, and it had lost about half of its genetic diversity.
The genome of the last surviving mammoths appears to be scrambled, and these animals likely had poor fertility and a higher chance of becoming diabetic. The last inbred population's malfunctioning genes meant they couldn't even smell flowers in the springtime. A sad, dying breath for these majestic beasts of the Ice Age. But as soon as Luva cracked the mammoth's genetic code, the scientific community noticed it contained building blocks needed to create a clone. A race began to be the first scientist to bring the mammoth back from the dead. The DNA found in the cells of excavated mammoths is too fragmented to be able to clone new animals. But one group of international scientists believe they can resurrect a woolly mammoth using a gene editing technique called CRISPR. This Jurassic Park-like project came about thanks to an alliance between the genetics firm Colossal and legendary geneticist George Church of Harvard University.
Over the last decade, humanity has made significant advances in understanding DNA and the field of genetics.
So the idea here is to take an elephant genome and then cut out the elephant genes and paste in mammoth genes. And that, in theory, could work.
But that would be a hybrid. I mean, that would be essentially a hairy elephant.
Yes, exactly. If you wish, it would be a genetically modified elephant.
But where does science like this stop? And what could go wrong?
Why? Why would you go about bringing back an animal that went extinct from, as far as we know, natural causes, to a world that is very, very different from the one it left?
But the techniques that we learn doing this kind of genome engineering could also then be applied to extinct species that went extinct very recently, because we humans caused that extinction.
Perhaps in the near future, gene editing will enable us to bring some of these animals back from oblivion and help us protect a further 1 million species currently under threat of extinction. This includes the largest carnivore on the planet, a creature that's only found in one place in the world, the Arctic Circle.
Polar bears actually evolve during the Ice Age from brown bears, from grizzly bears, and so they are highly adapted to those Ice Age conditions.
The hairs that make up their fur have evolved to be transparent, with a hollow core that reflects the ice and snow around them, making it appear white, but incredibly underneath their fur, their skin is dark, like their brown bear ancestors. But today, due to the polar bear's shrinking habitats, the species is under threat.
Polar bears are really struggling. How are they doing here?
So polar bears are listed as a vulnerable species, and we see reductions in population across the circumpolar Arctic. So they are struggling as climate warms, as habitat reduces, but also from human impact.
But there is some hopeful news for the polar bears of Svalbard. Since they were listed as a threatened species in 2008, the population is now recovering, with recent figures indicating that there are around 3,000 in Svalbard and the Barents Sea region.
I'll tell you something, Steve. I wouldn't have survived at the peak of the Ice Age. I mean, in the Arctic it was minus 25 and I was really cold.
Yeah, and obviously those conditions would have been replicated right here. It could have been just as harsh where we're standing now. But we know that there were all these beasts that not only survived, but thrived in those conditions.
It's amazing how little we actually know and how much we're learning all the time. To think it was only along this coastline that the amateur beachcomber found the remains of a mammoth, which gave us more clues about the past.
But we're forgetting one of the most dangerous predators of them all. One that came to these shores almost 1 million years ago.
We know that these animals were sharing this world with the greatest predator ever to exist on our planet.
And that's us.
The story of the Ice Age is the story of us. It's the time where humanity came to be. In 2013, one of the most remarkable prehistoric finds ever discovered in Britain was made on this very coastline. 900,000-year-old footprints preserved in estuary mud on Haysborough Beach. Ghostly glimpses of the long-lost peoples of the Ice Age. Michaela and I will uncover how our species survived one of the toughest environmental periods in Earth's history. The rugged and wild world of the Ice Age is taking me to Germany, one of the great heartlands of the Neanderthals. Rich in amazing Ice Age archaeology, it's a place that will give me a taste of the conditions Ice Age peoples endured day by day. We'll be stepping into this dramatic frozen world, following in the footsteps of those early humans and telling their incredible story. Helping me step back into their world is early human specialist Dr. James Dilley.
Steve.
James, nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
Look at this, perfect Ice Age day.
Well, we couldn't have put on much of a better setup for this.
What does this right now have in common with peak Ice Age?
In the harshest parts of the last glacial maximum, it would have been an open grassland with permafrost, very few trees around, pretty hostile, not a lot of opportunities for people.
Would you still have had a summer, spring and winter?
Definitely, but to put that into perspective, even in central France, based on organic samples, when it got really harsh, an average July temperature would be 5 degrees.
Seriously? What about midwinter? That must have been bleak.
-20.
That's extraordinary. How on earth did people manage to survive?
They moved around quite a lot. But what was that pull factor that encouraged them into those new areas? It may have been animals and herds that were migrating into those areas, and it was those groups that they were following as part of their hunting strategy. It might have been raw materials, or it might have been some kind of pressure as the population was starting to expand. And there's that human characteristic of wanting to explore.
It's the human pioneer, pushing on, exposing new frontiers.
Over thousands of years.
Neanderthals were a nomadic people. Learning how to read the landscapes they inhabited was vital. Knowing where to find firewood and materials for tool making, how to track animals on their seasonal migration. Failure to learn these essential skills would quickly result in starvation and death. Early humans favored areas which could provide ample food, good water, and shelter. And they found that in the cave-lined valleys of the Swabian Jura region. For the people of the Ice Age, this was a very special place. This whole area is a treasure trove of ancient archaeology. It's home to the largest known Neanderthal cave settlements in southern Germany, run by archaeologist Yvonne Tafelmeier.
Evie, hi.
Hi, Steve. Nice to meet you.
Likewise, likewise. I have so many questions, I don't really know where to start.
I hope I can answer at least some of them, and yeah, we'll try.
So what about this place? How is this view different to what you might have seen in the Ice Age standing in this exact spot?
It depends in which period you were there. In one of the very cold phases, you would imagine this valley without trees, without forest, a really steppy environment. Lots of Ice Age animals dwelling in the valley, like reindeer, cave bears or hyena.
So those caves, there are still remnants of those here today, right?
Yeah.
Can we go and look?
Yes, of course. I would like this.
With evidence dating back at least 115,000 years, caves like this are helping us understand these ancient people's fight for survival.
Oh, look at that.
Look at that. It's a really nice cave. It's the Backshall Loch. Welcome.
Home sweet Ice Age home.
Yes. We got lots of our knowledge about Neanderthals from this specific site.
You can get a sense for why this would have been such a perfect sanctuary for people back then. You have security from the elements, you have a potentially cozy place, particularly if there was the possibility of fire.
Here you can go back to the basics, what you need to live in a hopefully very peaceful way. And that's one of the basic things we all want nowadays as well.
Yeah, it's a really special place.
It's a really special place, yeah.
Neanderthals chose to live in close-knit communal groups. Young, old, male and female, families with children and babies, all on the move. Staying together would help increase the chance of survival. In this challenging environment, there are many dangers. For over 400,000 years, Neanderthal tribes lived and survived in the landscapes of Ice Age Europe. They're always on high alert for wild animals lying in wait, ready to pick off unsuspecting members of the group. And caves were an obvious place to hide. They offered safety and protection for all their families against the dangers lurking outside. But the protection offered by caves was a luxury that had to be fought for. When they found a cave that looked promising, they had to approach with caution because other dangers lurked inside.
Keiko, hi.
Hi.
Well, you certainly have my attention. That is incredibly impressive.
Yes, it's a special kind of animal we have here, cave bear.
It's definitely bigger than any other bear that I've seen around today. It's got these classic ridges, crests, and arches, and the big canine teeth that mark it out as a super predator. And I'm guessing that if you were an Ice Age human, this would be your worst nightmare.
Fiercely protective, bears used caves to raise cubs or hibernate in. Neanderthals learnt from experience to be wary of them. Deadly encounters taught them that bears were an adversary to be feared.
You've got two big scary predators, the bear, the person. A confrontation has such significant, possible catastrophic conclusions. If I had young kids and I knew that that place up there had cave lions and cave bears, that's the last place I'd go. What were the other predators you'd have had in this area?
There would have been some that would have been scary as well, including hyenas. And hyenas would have also occupied the caves.
Neanderthals were right to be afraid. Hyenas were a lethal foe. Recent cave finds near Rome found the bodies of 9 Neanderthals, including a child, all butchered by invading hyenas. With so many feared predators on the prowl, Neanderthals had to be ready to defend themselves, utilizing the basic materials they had to hand to create the tools and weapons they needed.
Nice workshop, James.
Oh, thank you.
I love what you've done with the place.
Well, you're very welcome. Take a seat.
Thank you very much.
We're going to have a go at flint napping. Now, the material's flint.
Yeah.
Napping is the process of striking it and shaping it. And we're going to be making some tools out of it.
Awesome. See, when they said I was going to have a nap by the river, this wasn't what I had in mind.
Yeah, not quite so relaxing, sadly. Clearly, people in the Ice Age had to find that raw material, and it would have looked something like this to begin with.
See, I live in the Chiltern Hills, and flint is everywhere.
Yeah.
But I've never seen it like this.
OK, well, this is, the raw stuff. But before I begin, pair of goggles and some gloves.
Amazing.
So what I'm going to do is start flaking the outside of it, and I'm going to use nothing more than just a beach pebble. I'm going to hold it up against my leg to brace it, and I'm going to hit the edge, just into the edge. It might look as if I'm going to really hit it hard, but it's not a test of strength. It's about accuracy and knowing how it breaks. So it wasn't a hard hit, but it's fractured.
What? It's a miracle!
And off comes
Seriously, that is so impressive.
Flint is hard but brittle, just like glass. Neanderthals knew it could be struck and flaked in a predictable way. And the beauty of flint is that it's ultra sharp.
And when you get a very fine flake, like that one, you look at the tip of that, that will be just a handful of molecules thick at the blade, almost surgical steel sharpness.
That looks like I could shave with it. Do you know what? My wife's never liked my beard. Do you mind if I kind of give it a little try?
It's a slight lateral motion from experience.
That is actually taking your hair. I can feel it is. I was expecting to be impressed, but you have taken it to a whole different level, I have to admit.
It seems simple, but it's complex. So these were clearly very, very skilled tool makers. Neanderthals were incredibly good flint knappers.
Having a scalpel-sharp cutting tool like this must have completely transformed every single thing they did.
Flint cutting tools come in all shapes and sizes. Small razor-sharp flakes were ideal for removing hides during the butchery process and slicing through flesh for cuts of meat. But larger hand axes were much better suited for dismembering big animal carcasses.
James, that is a work of art, and the thought that they were crafting technology like this that was not only beautiful but so practical, so useful. I'm really genuinely impressed.
It impresses me that it's so quick.
It's been like 10 minutes.
And you think of modern knives today that would have to be smelted and forged, many skills and processes involved. There's one napper in his rock, and you've got a very, very efficient cutting tool.
It's becoming clear the Ice Age humans had a lot more going for them than we thought. To begin to understand the big picture of humanity's evolutionary journey, I've come here to the Natural History Museum in London. Professor Chris Stringer, one of the world's leading paleontologists, is going to be my guide to the long-lost people of the Ice Age.
Chris, human evolution is obviously a massive subject. Can you give us a brief summary of how it all began?
So we think we had a common ancestor with our closest living relatives, the chimpanzees, maybe around 7 million years ago. And for the next 5 million years, human evolution only took place in Africa. And then around 2 million years ago, we get the appearance of a fully human species called Homo erectus, erect humans. And after that, we get the evolution of new forms of humans, such as the Neanderthals. And around 100,000 years ago, that was the beginning of the spread of Homo sapiens as we know it today, out of Africa. And that Ice Age drop of sea level, which occurred after 100,000 years, also facilitated some of the spreads of humans to new regions.
Neanderthals must have been pretty tough, and yet we've used that term in quite a derogatory way to call people stupid or thuggish. But that's not a true reflection of Neanderthals, is it?
It's really unfair on the Neanderthals. They were highly evolved humans, in their own way, as evolved as we are. They were sophisticated people. They had a stone tool culture. They had the tools to hunt and process animals, the tools to find plant resources, to dig up underground roots. They had the control of fire, and they must have built shelters, probably of wood, and we have no trace of those now, sadly.
How different did we look to Neanderthals? I mean, how different were they to you and me?
At first glance, we'd have seen them as human. I mean, they're walking on 2 legs and they've got a big brain and so on, but in detail, they were different. So their bodies were short and wide, relatively, a good physique to have in relatively cold conditions. They were very muscular. So they had a lot of muscle power, the upper body, very strong barrel chest, great big lungs, maybe 20% bigger volume than ours.
You've got some skulls here, so can we have a look at the difference?
Yeah, so I've got here a replica of a modern human like us, and here's a Neanderthal. This is a replica of one from France, about 50,000 years old. And this is a male Neanderthal, but he's got the typical features. So you can see there in the middle of the face is pulled forwards with a great big nose, so it's wide and projecting. They're being very active, tremendous bursts of energy, and that means they've got to draw a lot of air in and out of that nose, and I think that nose is partly about that. So there's a low forehead, and it's very long and low, but in there is a really big brain. So their brain was actually slightly larger than our average today. Our ancestors in the past had bigger brains than we do. Our brains have shrunk in the last 20,000 years, which is a bit of a scary thought.
As night approaches, the temperatures plummet. To survive the punishing cold, Ice Age people relied on one of the most elemental forces in our world. We don't know when they first learnt to harness fire for their own use, but when winter temperatures reached -20 and below, there's no way Neanderthals could cope without it. And they had a surprisingly sophisticated way of making it.
Our Neanderthal cousins left small pieces of evidence to prove that they not only could control fire, that they could make it on demand. And they relied on this stuff.
What is that?
It's an iron pyrite. The type of iron pyrite is marcasite, and you can actually strike it with a flint or some kind of hard stone and it will produce sparks.
Like flint and steel?
Exactly. So as well as my iron pyrite and flint striker, to catch my sparks, I will be using this stuff.
Is that horsesooth fungus?
Horsesooth fungus, exactly right. And they almost certainly used either this or something very similar. And this is one of those things that either takes 2 minutes or 10 minutes. But thankfully, we already have a fire. So you can see it's quite hard, but Neanderthals actually used another component to this. They used a bit more chemistry. This is a manganese dioxide. You can actually use powdered manganese dioxide as an accelerant. It will reduce the ignition temperature of making fire. So if I scratch a little bit of this on the surface, trying to get any snow on there, that should do. And find my striker. Hopefully, oh,
is that it?
Yep.
Yes. You beauty.
So the next stage is to have some nice dry grass available, and with a little bit more of that manganese dioxide to help us out in the true Neanderthal way. Pop this in the middle and get ignition.
Oh, I can smell it. That's beautiful. Yes!
Neanderthal fire with a bit of chemistry to help us out.
So presumably people would be carrying around a fire-making kit that would involve all these various elements and they'd be treasured.
Neanderthals were just the ultimate Ice Age human.
Fire was not just a necessity for keeping the family group warm. And both Neanderthals and sapiens alike used its heat to cook what they hunted. Neanderthals had more muscular bodies than Homo sapiens and needed a lot of energy to power them, consuming up to 5,000 calories a day. Though it's likely they supplemented their diet with grains and vegetables, they'd have to eat a lot of meat.
So did you bring the hot chocolate?
Not very prehistoric.
That's your first black mark. 1 star on TripAdvisor.
The quest for knowledge is opening new doors into the past, helping us better understand our Ice Age ancestors. They're finally emerging into the light so we can appreciate them anew.
The thing that I actually find quite heartening is that we had this image of the Neanderthal as being a slow and clumsy and stupid species, and now we're starting to understand that they were really sophisticated, which makes it even more intriguing as to why they went extinct.
I guess there's no one answer. It's a complexity of different reasons. Although my theory is it's all down to needlework.
Next time, we dive deep.
That's amazing! Completely blows my mind!
The new invention we still rely on today, the humble sewing needle.
So would you say the needle was more important than the spear?
We unlock the clues.
Oh wow,
And
look
this
at
is the ice
this!
core.
To an ancient catastrophe that devastated our world.
As the Ice Age comes to a close, a new threat emerges. one which could wipe out our entire species. The big thaw is on its way.
Softly you whisper my name. In the night we find a flame. Hearts beat in perfect time. Two souls on the sweetest climb. Stars above shining bright, guiding us through the night. We dance under the sky. In your arms I know I can fly. Whispered by the moonlight, love is in full flight. Hand in hand we stand, forever we'll understand. Your eyes hold the key to the dreams we set free. Together we are strong. In your love is where I belong. Your eyes hold the key to the dreams we set free. Together we are strong. In your love is where I belong. Every